Hello everyone, today I want to teach you about one of the most exciting developments in camera technology, and that is the mid-range sensor. Now, I like the word enthusiast. I'm enthusiastic about the word enthusiast. I enthusiastically use the word enthusiast when I refer to mid-range sensors, but if you prefer mid-range or semi-pro, whatever brings you guys joy, I'm happy to hear it. Now, when we look at all the different cameras that are available, and you look at entry-level cameras right now, they often will use the now ubiquitous 24 megapixel backside illuminated sensor. Affordable, effective, maybe a little bit pedestrian. When we go up into the Pro series, that's where we get our 45 megapixel or 60 megapixel sensors fully stacked to the ceiling, and they do amazing things, and they make all your dreams come true. But it's the mid-range, the enthusiast, the semi-pro level where things get very interesting. So today, we are going to be looking at the sensors out of 4 powerful mid-range mirrorless cameras. We've got the Canon EOS R6 Mark III, the Panasonic S1 II, the Nikon Z6 III, and the Sony A7 V. What's interesting about this market is that all the manufacturers are trying something a little bit different. Now, I should say, 3 out of the 4 sensors we're talking about today are what we call partially stacked sensors. They're not going to have the same fast readout speeds that the fully stacked professional sensors have, but they also won't come with the exorbitant price tags. But Canon EOS R6 Mark III does something slightly different. They're going for a standard sensor. It's not even backside illuminated, but it is high resolution, and they stand apart because they really are fully designing their own sensors. So, I'm Chris Niccolls, this is PetaPixel. We are going to take a deep look into this today. Let's get started. Okay, so I know I'm supposed to be looking at the samples that we shot to evaluate them properly, but I got ADD, and then I'm like, well, what's at KH.com? So now here we are, I'm on their website looking, and you know how we love KH.com. We like that they give you great pricing on your used gear. They'll give you 5% trade-in bonuses on a lot of pre-owned gear. If you trade something in and buy from KH, you'll get that bonus. That's really nice. They got fantastic warranties and great return policies. But you know what else they do? They actually add to the photographic community. If you click on the Expert Advice tab, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but there's fantastic articles like budget cameras every content creator needs in 2026. How to get the most out of your money, what gear you need for the new season. I mean, there's so much information there. You should definitely check it out. So go to KH.com. They are PetaPixel's official pre-owned camera gear partner. Okay, so let's get to our rankings. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is dynamic range. And one great indicator of dynamic range is how far you can push these files and what kind of detail is maintained in the shadows and how much noise we left over with. Now, before we get into our dynamic range push examples, I do want to mention how we shot these tests. So first off, all 4 cameras on a tripod. Obviously, we're shooting with our Westcott lights. They're very consistent. At the test chart, we're shooting the exact same settings. So 1/40th of a second, ISO 100, of course, to give us the best performance possible, and at f8 on all cameras. We're going to be using different lenses for these tests, of course, but at f8 we should get pretty similar results. And we are very underexposed, then pushing up about 4 stops, okay? And so this is giving us our final result. Last thing I want to mention is we are using mechanical shutter because that is where you get the best DR performance out of these cameras. If you shoot electronic shutter, you will typically lose dynamic range. Now, the Nikon Z6 III is unique in that it gives the same performance, mechanical or electronic, but when you use electronic shutter on all 4 of these cameras, we're basically going to have on-par performance. We're going to shoot mechanical because we really want to see the maximum potential and the differences that are inherent there. Now, we're going to also reference Bill Claff's excellent findings. He does an amazing job of testing dynamic range. We just want to do some sample shots as well to see if our findings line up with his. And so in 4th place, we have the Nikon Z6 III. Now, this should not come as any surprise because first off, it is the oldest of the 4 cameras, but also when we first looked at this camera and then we did some testing later on, we did find, yeah, the dynamic range does have some downsides. Again, to give context, all the shots that we're looking at are very close. And in practical terms, I don't find it to be that big a deficit. However, there are some issues here. The Nikon Z6 III does tend to have the most noise when you push it and lacks some detail. The fact that it's a lower resolution 24 megapixel sensor doesn't help things either. So third place, this is a tough one because we're really splitting hairs at this point. They're so close, but we're going to give third place to the Canon R6 Mark III. Its sensor is quite interesting because I mentioned before, it's not partially stacked in any way, but Canon also do bake in a little bit of noise reduction even into their RAW files. There's nothing you can really do about that. So this should give us better noise performance, but also a slight loss of detail. At the same time, we do have to remember that the Canon sensor is 33 megapixels. And so having that extra detail means you could apply a little bit more noise reduction and still get similar resolution to something like a 24 megapixel sensor, which will become relevant shortly. So looking at the Canon, you can see good detail still maintained, slightly cleaner shadows than, for example, the Nikon Z6 III, and that's going to put it in third place. Second place, it goes to the Panasonic S1 II. Now this is interesting because this is a 24 megapixel partially stacked sensor, and on paper it looks very similar to what's used in the Nikon Z6 III, but Panasonic gets fantastic results out of this sensor, probably because they're doing a little bit of image stacking magic in the background. Now, when you look at the Panasonic file up close, yeah, it's only 24 megapixels, but it's retaining excellent sharpness and detail out of that resolution, at the same time delivering just a little bit better noise performance than the Canon EOS R6 Mark III. And so it's going to win just by a hair over that camera. And of course, that means our winner, it's going to be the A7 IV with its very modern sensor. Looks like we agree with Bill on his findings here based on the shots that we took too, because the A7 IV gives you the best of both worlds. First off, you can see we've got excellent noise performance. It's clean, even a little bit cleaner than the Panasonic S1 II. On top of that, it's giving us that 33 megapixels of resolution. Great detail. And when you combine the two together, you get a sensor which is fantastic, even when you have to push those shadows up to the extreme. But wait, we're not done with dynamic range yet, because I want to talk about a trick that Panasonic has up its sleeve, and that is a pixel shifted high resolution stack of multiple images to enhance your image quality. Now, why I'm signaling Panasonic? Nikon can do this, so can Sony, but you can only do it through the software at home, and that can still be a benefit, but man, it's a pain in the butt. I really prefer having a system where you can do it in camera, because then you can see the result and make sure that you capture the image. And that's Panasonic's big strength. It can stack images to make a 96 megapixel photo, and not only does it give better resolution, but it also gives better dynamic range. Looking at the sample shot in comparison, you'll notice just how little noise there is, and of course, way more detail, which is going to become important very soon. Okay, so now we are going to talk about resolution and detail, and I gotta throw some caveats out here before we talk about this, because look, actual detail is so dependent on things like user capability, user error, what lenses you're using, all this kind of stuff, right? Shutter speeds, image stabilization. So megapixels do make a difference, absolutely. And so when we look at these sensors here, sensors like the Nikon and the Panasonic are going to rank lower. There is a benefit to having those extra 9 megapixels when you go to the Canon and the Sony. I would actually say the Canon and Sony are very similar. You know, maybe the Sony has a slight edge just because of maybe that noise reduction, but honestly, in the end, 33 megapixels, it's going to be very similar. I'd rank those in the top. 24 megapixels, there is a downside. I'd rank those a little bit lower. Again, it's all going to depend on the output that you want, how big you want to print, how far you want to crop. But I do think that more megapixels makes a difference. Okay, so Sony, Canon, they wrestle for the top position. Panasonic, Nikon, they wrestle for the bottom, except, as I promised you guys very soon, Panasonic does have their high-res mode. And when you look at the results here, 96 megapixels, it is clearly the winner. In fact, of course, it's going to dominate even over the 33 megapixel sensors. And yes, again, you can do this on the Nikon and the Sony as well, but you got to do it through their software, and I really hate that, but it is a possibility. If we can take any lesson away from this, it's just that if you have a situation where the camera's not moving, you can stabilize it, shoot something still, and use these high-res modes, you're going to gain a big benefit in overall detail and resolution, regardless of what camera system supports it. Now, throughout this video, we're going to be referencing the handy-dandy test chart, which is both very Canadian and also kind of getting beat up. I don't know. If you want to see anything else on here, leave those suggestions in the comments below. We'd love to do that. But The greatest Canadian test chart in the world is no good without the right lighting to go with it, which is why we use Westcott L120B lights. One is on the chart right now, one's lighting me, but normally we're going to use this to fill both for very even and very consistent colored light. I also love that I can turn these way down. I had them down to 10% when I'm, doing the high ISO test or doing the dynamic range pushes, and then I can crank them up when I want to do the detail. I mean, they're beautiful lights, very even and fantastic for both studio and portrait and video work, as well as technical testing. So check out these Westcott L120B lights. You can go right to fjwestcott.com or click the link in the description below and get yours today. They're absolutely PetaPixel's preferred lighting partner. Now, back in the day, we would often judge sensors, especially in the DSLR days and early mirrorless days, based off of what their high ISO performance was, okay? But things are more complicated nowadays, and that's not really a great indicator for dynamic range. That's why now we tend to underexpose and push our photos afterwards in post to really see what's going on. So we thought we would do a test here just to kind of show this point. We shot every camera at 12,800 ISO, and looking at the results, they're all pretty bad. You don't want to shoot at these ISOs if you can avoid it. The only thing I will say is that higher megapixels do make a difference when it does come to high ISO performance, because if you look at equivalent photos, let's say 33 megapixels versus 24 megapixels at the exact same viewing size, the noise will tend to be smaller and look reduced on the higher megapixel files, okay? But the fact of the matter is we are spoiled nowadays with excellent sensors, no matter which of these cameras you use, and the playing field is very level at higher ISOs. Ooh, next let's talk about the readout speed of these sensors, because sensor technology isn't just about resolution and shadow detail, it's also about how fast it can scan. And this is important because entry-level sensors will be slower sensors. You will tend to have issues with things like rolling shutter, for example, where things passing through the frame will once be vertical, now go diagonal. And it can be really bad if you've got sports in action, golf clubs and things like that. One of the main reasons to upgrade to a mid-range camera is to get a faster scanning sensor, because it unlocks the ability to use electronic shutter for a lot of sports and action. And this is why all of these cameras feature quite blisteringly fast burst rates in electronic shutter mode that are legitimately useful for quick action in sports and wildlife. And we talked earlier about how 3 out of 4 of these sensors are partially stacked. Well, the reason why you stack a sensor is to get faster readout speeds, and again, unlock these benefits for both video work and for electronic shutter usage. So let's get to our rankings and see how these sensors perform. In 4th place is going to be the Sony a7 IV with a readout speed of around 15 milliseconds or so. And again, you know what? That's very good. But I do want to talk about this because when we first reviewed the a7 IV, when we were given the press briefing, we were told by the engineers, this is actually like 12.5 milliseconds, which is insanely fast. Turns out that was an inaccurate number, okay? I mean, usually they're very accurate about the data they give and we trusted them, but it turns out the a7 IV has the slowest sensor. So 4th place, that's what it's gonna be. 3rd place, and honestly 2nd place, it's going to be a tie. Panasonic's S1 II and Nikon Z6 III, again, on paper are using very similar sensors, which have around a 14.5 millisecond readout speed. They're just neck and neck. So it is a tie there, and that's a great result. Which means that the winner is the Canon EOS R6 Mark III, actually the one sensor that's not stacked in any way, shape, or form. And this is really quite an achievement. Also remember, this is a 33 megapixel sensor, so they're getting fast readout speed and high resolution. It's amazing that Canon's able to do this with their sensor. You're getting about 13.5 milliseconds readout speed. That all being said, if we keep this in context, guys, all 4 of these sensors are very close to each other. I don't know that you would really see any difference in the actual appearance of rolling shutter from one to the other. It's always fun to see how the technology falls and where everything goes, but in the end, I would say electronic shutter, readout speed on all 4 of these cameras is basically a wash. So in today's video, I hope you guys enjoyed yourselves. We're only scratching the surface. We had like 8 more categories, but we're not going to talk about it because my whiskey's out, and that means it's time to end the video. But what have we learned about our little foray into sensor technology? I think we've definitely learned that all 4 of these cameras take fantastic photos and that we are splitting hairs in a lot of cases with these rankings. We've also learned that you buy a mid-range or enthusiast level or semi-pro camera, whatever word you want to use, because there are meaningful benefits to things like readout speed and better electronic shutter usage, be able to get those faster burst rates, and In the case of the Canon and the Sony, even getting higher resolution than the base 24 megapixels that all entry-level cameras come with. But you know what else I find really exciting about this mid-range category is there's a lot of old-fashioned competitiveness going on between the manufacturers, and it's fun. It's fun to see how everybody's trying to one-up each other with different techniques and different technology. You know, the Nikon Z6 III is the oldest of the bunch, but they were the first to incorporate a partially stacked sensor in their mirrorless cameras, and it's a fantastic platform. It may not be able to maximize the technology quite the same as the most recent cameras, but you also got to respect the fact that it's a fast-shooting, versatile camera, which does great video, and it's now very affordable. And hey, you got to give kudos to Panasonic for taking a very similar sensor, but being able to push just a little bit more dynamic range out of it while still making one of the best hybrid cameras and certainly the best video camera out of the bunch. I also got to give them recognition for having that high resolution mode in camera because I'm far more likely to use it. And I think you guys have seen the dramatic benefits of using a mode like that when it applies to your subject matter. And then Sony, the a7 IV, I mean, they've come out with this 33 megapixel sensor that dramatically boosts dynamic range over their older 33 megapixel sensor, giving us a great combination of both excellent shadow detail, low noise, and high resolution. That's pretty awesome. And last but not least, let's all give some love to the Canon EOS R6 Mark III. I was super impressed by this camera last year. They're making their sensors from the ground up and obviously making a very competitive product that gives you high resolution, fast scan speeds, and great dynamic range. Regardless of which of these four cameras you might be looking at or already own, you've got a fantastic product, and this is a really exciting part of the market. And so I hope you guys at home enjoyed watching this video. Pour yourself a whiskey, contemplate the mysteries of the mid-range sensor. When you write those comments below, let's all be nice to everybody else and compliment how great their camera is, whether you use that brand or not, because they're all doing a fantastic job and they're all making the whole world of photography a better place. And also consider supporting us with a PetaPixel.com membership. We love doing these side projects and, maybe talking about the history or the science, not just the reviews. And you really help us out when you do that membership. Look at all the amazing benefits that you're going to get. It's only $3 a month or $30 a year. And we also love to talk about the science and technology behind photography and videography on the PetaPixel podcast, as well as answer your burning questions. So check it out on this exact same channel or all your favorite podcasting apps. You can listen to us while you're writing mean comments and nice comments about everybody else's camera. As always, we love having you here. We're going to see you with more on PetaPixel.